Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. It's been quite a week in Oklahoma, and our hearts certainly go out to everyone across the state who've been affected by the widespread flooding, tornadoes, and other storm damage. Even before this week, however, many producers were dealing with damage to their crops from waterlogged fields. We traveled to Beckham County today to learn more.
Well, certainly we've been really blessed here in Beckham and Ouachita County with the amount of moisture we've had here just in the month of May alone. Depending on where you live in the two counties, you could have anywhere between 10 to 14 inches, and that was already on top of a soil profile that was actually full. All that moisture that came in May really didn't have anywhere to go except just settle in some of these fields and go down through the rivers, and the rivers got out of the banks and flooded a lot of it and did a lot of damage to some of the crops, especially along the areas here where we have lots of moisture and along our riverbanks there. And as we're looking at the alfalfa field here, certainly one of those you can see there's still lots of standing water out there, and this crop is almost getting to the point where it's ready to go again as far as being cut. But certainly with the forecast of more rain this week, I really don't know how it will be or when we'll be able to get back in these fields.
You know, if you look on the Mesonet, our soil moisture across the state is as wet as it can be. And that means that a lot of our soils aren't going to drain very well. And so you're going to have runoff, a lot of runoff. When you do have ponding, it's going to be there for a while. And that's because when our soils are saturated, the only way that water can move is through saturated flow. When we're dry, the dry soil will actually pull water down into it. But then wet soil, it has to be pushed down through the force of gravity. And in many instances in Oklahoma with our clay subsoil, that process is really slow. You know, a sandy soil may be able to drain a couple inches per hour, or a clay loam maybe a half to 2/10 of an inch an hour. And then if you have a lot of heavy clay that swells when it's wet, it may be, you know, less than 1/10 of an inch per hour. And so when you have these ponded areas like what we have here, it's just going to take a long time. You know, if you have a ponded area that's 6 inches deep and you're only moving 1/10 of an inch per hour, then it's going to be 60 hours for that water to move through that profile.
Ouachita and Beckham County, especially as they meet up, this is really big alfalfa country, and it's a really big economic crop. Certainly with the recent rains we've had, depending on how it was put up, when it was cut down, and certainly the amount of water you've had on it, the relative feed value has really gone down. And certainly anybody that knows anything about alfalfa, that's how mainly most of it is sold as far as on the relative feed value index that we produce through the soil lab there at OSU. Economically, from say 200 to 225, you know, a ton, it could be down into the 150, 165.
You know, most of this flooding, it's going to have very little impact on the inherent soil characteristics. I mean, you're going to have crop damage due to waterlogging and things like that. Probably the biggest challenges we're going to face are areas that have washed out, where we have hopefully not big gullies, but we're going to have washout areas, terraces that have been blown out.
A lot of producers, I talked to one yesterday there that he estimates this first crop that's coming off there, he's probably lost between $80,000 and $90,000 just because the reduced amount of crop yield and also value of the crop as far as nutritional value for the animals. Well, this producer was really lucky because he got his hay cut down there about 3 weeks ago. The amount of water, there's lots of water out in that field that you can't see, and certainly that's going to be a detriment of when we can get that done. Right across the road there, that guy got his cut down just before the rains, and he had to go ahead and bale that up, and it almost looked like rows of mud that he had cut down because of all the dirt and trash that's in there. And certainly the value of the alfalfa across the road here that's already baled up is not going to be worth very much. As a matter of fact, it's still sitting in the field. It kind of depends on what Mother Nature gives us, but certainly we're hopeful that you know, we're going to get some sunshine. Maybe we'll get out of this weather wet pattern, and we'll get lots of growing days, good sunny days where this crop can grow and they can get it out.
Well, and as part of that, Brian, water is not the only thing that moves through the soil profile. There's also nutrients too.
Yeah, as we have movement of the water through that profile, it's a soil solution that's moving down. It's grabbing all things with it. So cation and anion, so that's calcium and magnesium and salt particles. All those things are in a soil solution that plants take up. as a nutrient in themselves is moving down with it. Now, a lot of our nutrients aren't extremely mobile, so yes, we're having movement down of some nutrients with that water going down, but it's really our mobile nutrients that move the most. And the mobile nutrients are things like nitrate, sulfur, chloride, boron. They're mobile because they don't attach to the soil particle, which is a charge dependent. They repel from soil particles, so they really exist in that soil solution 100%. So as our water moves down, it's moving those mobile nutrients down through the profile to the limiting layer, to wherever that water goes and either stops. It's either going to keep going to depth or will hit a limiting layer and go down slope or down sideways. So again, nitrate, sulfur, boron, chloride, those are our most commonly seen mobile nutrient deficiencies.
So from that standpoint, the winter crops are already standing, the summer crops are in the ground. Say we planted soybeans, we were lucky enough to get that window of opportunity to plant, and what can we expect from standing water from a recently wetted field?
Okay, so with the standing water, it's not so much movement down through the soil. Standing water means that the water has hit a limiting layer and you filled that soil profile, so there really hasn't been the downward movement. Standing water is more of a oxygen issue, and so we see lack of oxygen impacting some of our nutrients and making them harder to reach. So if you have standing water, you'll have issues with phosphorus availability. In our sandy soils, we probably did lose some of the potassium that those crops are going to need, especially when setting seed in the future.
With those summer crops that may have been planted, how do producers know where they are with their soil nutrients, and when do they go back to try to correct it?
So once we're in season, we're going to assume that everything's planted already. It's more challenging because it's more time consuming. A pre-plant, you'd be out there soil sampling, have time to melt to the lab. The lab would analyze and get it back, and there's more time. Once we're in season, really it starts looking at watching the areas, watching the crops for any deficiency symptomology and tying it to the soil texture. So if I've got a cornfield that's a sandy soil texture, I'm out there looking for things like a sulfur or nitrogen deficiency. So nitrogen deficiency is yellowing at the lower of the plant, sulfur is yellowing at the top of the new growth. I'm also looking for potassium, which shows a different symptomology around that edge in a sand. In soils like this that might be holding water, I'm looking for also nitrogen. Maybe we volatilized some nitrogen, maybe we've had some tie-ups. So you really got to be more of a plant detective than a soil detective and let the plant let you know what's going on. So knowing your nutrient deficiencies, going through those keys.
And there are actual charts and illustrations to help with that.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunity. There's several apps that are available that you can look that show nutrient deficiencies as visual. We also have some fact sheets with OSU.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. And for links to all of those, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. Extremely unstable air this past week brought numerous severe weather threats. Multiple tornadoes, hail, and heavy rains blanketed the state, causing widespread flooding. The 5-day rainfall map from May 22nd shows incredible amounts in the northeast quadrant of the state. The orange areas are in the 6+ and the reds 8 and 9 inches of rain. Skytook would win the award that nobody wants with 9.47 inches. Closely behind is Pawnee, receiving 9.11 inches. Soils were already wet over most of the state when these storms began. Now the entire state, even the Panhandle, is showing fully saturated soils. This map from Wednesday shows bare soil 4-inch fractional water index levels of 1 at all but 4 stations, and they were at 0.9. Remember, 1 is the top of the wetness scale. All this water had to go somewhere, and that was our rivers, lakes, and streams. This is the current flood advisory warnings as of May 22nd. It's primarily focused in the northeast section that received the heaviest rainfall. Lake levels are brimming full across the state. All but Atoka, where dam work is being done, are above the normal pool stage and into the flood pool stage. Many are within a few feet of even that being full, with more rain expected next week. Now here's Gary with more on rainfall information.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, rain is obviously the name of the game this week. We have no drought in Oklahoma. And frankly, if you do have some drought, let me know, because I'm ready for a little bit of drought. For the spring thus far, we have a wide range of values across the state, but all of them are good. Some of them are too good, of course, but in the main body of the state, from about 9 inches to more than 20 inches of rainfall across parts of the area, especially across central, northeastern, and southeastern Oklahoma. Those are those big values. And in the Panhandle, we have 3 to 5 inches in the western Panhandle, which isn't too much above normal, but it is near normal. So the departure from normal rainfall maps, we do see much of the state above normal by at least a couple of inches. And then as we go from west central up through northeastern Oklahoma, we see those values 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even as much as 12 inches above normal some areas. And that's the reason for that drastic flooding, catastrophic flooding in some areas. Now, if you look at the percent of normal for that time frame, March 1st through May 21st, again, almost all the state is above normal to some degree, some of it drastically above normal, as much as 240% above normal for spring. And that's what's so significant, is this is occurring during spring, our wettest time of the year. You know, it extends up into the latter parts of June as well. But having a drastically wet spring means you are drastically wet to a greater degree. So we are seeing one of the wettest Mays on record, certainly not as drastic as the May of 2015 that ended up being the wettest month in the state's history, but we are exceptionally wet this May, which makes us exceptionally wet this spring. Hopefully we can start to dry out and get things a little bit more normal around here as we approach the summer months. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
We've seen the impact of all the rain on crops. Now let's look at some of the impacts on cattle with Dave Lalman, our extension beef cattle specialist. And Dave, lots of scenes like this around Oklahoma this week. What kind of guidance are you giving producers? Lots of things to think about.
There are a lot of things to think about. You know, hopefully situations like this, the water will recede, and if it doesn't, and if animals are kind of trapped in a small area, you know, some way they just need to get some feed to those animals. That would be the main thing to try to minimize their stress. The last thing you want to do is feed a lot of concentrate. You know, just keep it simple. Hay, just you can't go wrong feeding some hay, because they're not going to be able to overconsume on it. So that would probably be the best thing to do in a situation like that.
I know we're kind of running through a checklist here, but monitoring for illnesses after exposure to this, kind of scenario?
Absolutely. I mean, there are going to be situations where, you know, the water is contaminated with bacteria and protozoa. Some of those can cause disease, diarrhea, giardia comes to mind, which can affect both humans and livestock. And so, you know, that's going to have an incubation period. And so once the animals get to safety or some better situation, they need to continue to be monitored for a while, just in case.
Pastures are waterlogged anyway, even before the storms this week. Any long-term impact to start being mindful of?
Well, I mean, not immediately. You know, the best thing for a grazing animal is to get to graze on high quality forage this time of year. So fortunately, you know, we're not in a situation where we've got, you know, cured forage or wintertime or forage and that kind of thing. Long term, yeah, probably, you know, generally speaking, we have a really wet year like this, our hay quality declines, and so does pasture forage quality. So, you know, longer term, just be thinking about, be sure and get your hay tested, get those numbers back, and then evaluate your upcoming winter program, because it could be affected by forage quality.
And unfortunately, as widespread as the storms were, no doubt some producers are documenting livestock injuries and unfortunately deaths as part of this. what kind of guidance do you have?
I mean, it's going to happen. There are just a lot of situations like this, and unfortunately, we're going to lose a few animals. So, you know, probably the best thing to do would be to contact your county extension educator, the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service, and those folks will have access to fact sheets. They'll have contact information for appropriate methods or commercial businesses that dispose of those dead animals.
Okay, Dave Lalman, thanks a lot for your advice, and we'll see you again soon. And for a link to some of those resources that Dr. Lalman mentioned, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
We've had quite a bit of rain this year, which with rain, anytime you have extreme weather patterns, whether it's snow, lots of rain, drought, that's stressful for animals. So stress always lowers immunity in these animals. One of the problems we see with wet weather, especially, is in the feet and in the skin, constantly staying wet. This allows for penetration of bacteria, which can lead to infections. Bacteria like Dermatophilus congolensis, which causes an ulcerative, exudative dermatitis, little round spots of infection that you'll see on cattle and maybe some other animals. Not uncommon when we get lots of rain. The other thing that you'll see, animals tend to congregate in areas. They're trying to avoid the rain. They're going to go to certain areas, congregate. The longer they stay there, the more fecal material that's deposited. Cows lay down in that. Cow gets up. If she's got fecal material on her teats, then a calf nurses that. He's prone to getting infections. We'll see some increase in calf scours and those types of diseases in these animals. I think what's most important is to keep a close eye on these animals and monitor and be ready to any animal that shows any signs of disease or an infection. You need to be ready to treat early, because we know our outcomes are most likely going to be more successful if we get on top of those diseases early. These moist, wet conditions and these warm temperatures, ideal conditions for our nematodes, our worms in our cattle, and especially in our small ruminants. Strongly suggest to those sheep and goat producers to really stay on top of their monitoring of that. Either do fecal egg counts, use your FOMANCHA cards, or a 5-point check to make sure you find those animals early and get them treated if they're having problems with parasites. Cattle producers probably need to pay especially close attention to those animals that are 2 years of age or less, because we know they have more problems with parasites. They may want to do some fecal egg counts and be sure and stay on top of keeping these animals free from parasites as best as possible. You're obviously going to see, with more water, you're going to see pools, you're going to see more mosquitoes. You know, diseases like West Nile virus or something like that's transferred through mosquitoes may become more of a problem. One of the things that we might have to worry about later on is, with flooding, you get disturbance of the soil. There could be some bacterial spores that this flood kicks up and deposits it in areas that they normally wouldn't be. So spores like blackleg, your Clostridium shovii, they may become more of a problem this summer, especially if it gets dry and cattle get to grazing low. And anthrax, we don't usually see anthrax in Oklahoma, but following floods, a lot of times we'll see some cases of that show up just because we've disturbed the soil and those spores have been exposed where cattle can actually come in contact with them. And these animals also tend to deteriorate rapidly, and if you see that, you probably ought to contact your veterinarian and let him come out and take some samples to check to make sure that's not what's going on. It doesn't look like the forecast shows more and more rain coming, so this isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon. Especially just keep a close eye on your animals and make sure that they're doing well.
Every cow-calf producer has that one or a few cows in his herd that are just really hard to handle, those really ornery cows. Those that even though they're good-looking cows, you'd kind of like to have an excuse to go ahead and send them to town, to cull them, to get them out of your herd so that they reduce the incidence of possible danger to you or other cattle. Well, now I think we've got another good reason to cull those cows. University of Florida published a study just a few years ago with over 400 Brahma cross cows over a 2-year period of time. What they did was they scored each cow individually with a temperament score. And they did that by 3 different ways. They would have a technician walk into a pen with a cow, and whether she was docile or whether she acted very agitated and aggressive towards the technician, they scored her 1 through 5. As they put a cow onto the working chute, then how she acted on the chute, they gave that a score of 1 through 5. And finally, how rapidly she would leave the chute, the exit velocity they called it, again was scored 1 through 5. They averaged those scores to give each cow a temperament index. Also, they took blood samples and measured the amount of cortisol. That's the hormone in the blood that we often call the fight or flight hormone, the one that really gets elevated when an animal of any type gets frightened or is very agitated. What they found was that there was a direct correlation not only between the temperament score, but also the blood cortisol level and the reproductive capability of those cattle. Those that had that higher temperament score, those that were more excitable and had more cortisol in their blood, also were the ones that were less likely to become pregnant, not only to artificial insemination, but in natural breeding seasons as well. So I think that gives us just another good excuse that if we have that 1 or 2 or 3 cows that are really hard to handle, go ahead and cull them, because the chances are they're going to be less likely to become pregnant in the upcoming breeding season. And it just is one of those situations where if we'll cull them, then we can make room for another cow that is more docile and is more likely to get rebred. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Wheat prices are up 40 cents over last week. And Kim, what's going on with markets?
Well, we actually saw a 50-cent price increase this week, and then it backed off about a dime. I think the world is looking at what's going on oat crop. I think Russia and Ukraine have ran out of wheat to sell. I think they've been coming into the United States. I think stocks of quality wheat are starting to tighten up a little bit. The world price increased, and I think it brought along the U.S. crop. I think the market's also looking at what's going on with new crop wheat in the hard red winter and soft red winter wheat areas. Too much rain overall. I think it's lowering the yields and probably lowering the quality to a certain degree, and I think that's a problem. And the funds were record short with hard red winter wheat. They're backed off a little bit of that. They were long on soft red winter wheat. 2 out of every 3 contracts that the managed funds held was short, and they've got to get out of those positions. Plus, they've got a massive amount of short contracts in corn. They got to get out of that, and as corn prices go up, it tends to bring wheat prices up. We got that 40-cent price increase. I think it's just getting us back up, but it's still below the production cost of production.
What does that mean for 2019 as we move forward?
Well, as you look at 2019 and the outlook, I think probably the USDA WASDE is the best indicator of prices for next year. The average price for the U.S. came in at $4.70. You got to back that off 20 cents. You look over the last 10 years, our prices ran about 20 less than the U.S. price. So that'd get us down to $4.50 for an average price. So I think as you're looking at, we're now at $4.15 for a forward contract. We got a potential 35-cent increase there sometime during the year. So I think unless things change, prices are going to stay below $5 this next year.
So producers really should start thinking about selling some of their wheat.
Well, I think if they're looking at developing a marketing plan, I think it's extremely important that they not base it on outlook, that they do a mechanical plan and follow those mechanical steps. Get the emotion out of it, especially with low prices. Get wishful thinking out of it. You've got to look at the situation and then pull the trigger mechanically on that.
So when should they set up those mechanical triggers? When should they sell their wheat?
Well, first, you know, the old caveat that past experiences or past transactions do not indicate what's going to happen. But over the last 11 years, 10 of those years, you needed to have that wheat sold by the end of September. 9 of those 11 years, you should have sold it in June, July, and August. If you'd have sold it in June, July, or August, each of those of the last 11 years, you'd have averaged about $5.80, $5.90 a bushel. As you go on out into the deferred months, that average price declines. So I'd say have the majority of it sold by the end of September. And I think the market changed when the Black Sea, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan came in and started taking the export demand. You know, those crops come in July, August, and September. They hit the export market around that September 1, and then prices start going down. So I think the market's changed as the Black Sea came in.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And before we head out this week, I want to tell you about the upcoming OSU Ranch Tour across Northwest Oklahoma. The 2-day tour will visit 4 ranches as well as stops looking at how forages have come back following the recent wildfires, as well as the benefits of prescribed burning. The tour will also stop at the Cargill Salt Plant near Freedom and the Cattleman's Choice Feed Yard near Gage. The OSU Northwest Ranch Tour will be June 5th and 6th, and registration is $40. The deadline for registration is actually this Wednesday. For more information, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
As we leave you today, a reminder that help and information about agriculture and the flood and any number of topics is available at your nearest county extension office anytime. We also have information at sunup.okstate.edu. I'm Lyndall Stout. We'll see you next time at SUNUP.